one of the topics that has come through in the day and we're going to talk about now is the electrification of vehicles. So it might be a good time to sort of link into that area. So keep your current vehicle for a little while. Let's see what's happening in the space in the future with electrification of vehicles. Now, strangely enough, and luckily enough, we've got an expert in that area. He's the CEO of Electric Vehicle Company. Works with industry on this very sort of topic. How do we accelerate the electrification of road transport? So to help your decision-making process, do you fix your airbag or do you hold off for an electric vehicle? Would you please welcome Behyad Jafari to the stage? Close enough.
Thanks, mate. Is that right?
You can have it.
All right.
There you go, lovely.
Sure. Keep tweeting as I talk, guys. I actually represent car companies, so taking the airbag recall off of the trending topic would be really helpful for me right now. Thank you. But it is really great to be back. I was asking the team earlier if I'm allowed to call myself an alumni of WSU, considering I dropped out. I'm guessing they didn't check my academic record before they asked me to speak, but for the students in the room, we don't all become billionaires staying in school. It's much more valuable to actually have a degree. But I really want to come and talk to you all today about the future of mobility. Now, obviously I'm going to focus on electric vehicles, it's up there in the title, but what I thought I would do is start off with a bit of what is the future of mobility. Literally, what does that mean? Because it's an industry jargon term. But rather than focusing just on what is possible, what technology exists, where is the technology trending, what philosophical questions do we need to ask ourselves as we continue to go down the track towards autonomous vehicles, also want to look and focus a little bit more on what's actually available to the people in this room. And importantly, what's available to people very far away from this room in places like Asia, Europe, the Americas, that's not available to people here. Why is that different? What can we do about it? And what opportunities do we get? Now, what comes up first? A little bit about us. We're an industry body representing companies from right across Australian sectors. That means that it doesn't matter what your business does, you can be members of the Electric Vehicle Council. We'll take your money, so please come and sign up. These are our members here. Does anyone see their company's logo? Stick your hand up if you're a member of ours. No? Good. It means I can phone it in. You guys don't pay my bills. Excellent. Now, I realise I'm the second last speaker today. All the different topics are probably starting to merge into one. So if you remember nothing else, remember I'm the guy with the cool cars. That's basically what we do. There is really no other purpose for this slide other than to show off the cool cars that we represent. But okay, talking about the future of mobility. Now, when we talk about this topic, people generally know what a driverless car is because Hollywood's given us this, right? You jump into a pod of some sort, a shuttle, tell it where you're going, it drives you there, till the bad guy starts getting away and you pull out a steering wheel and you chase them down. We won't build steering wheels in these cars in the future, that's not going to be an option. But what is the CACE? What is CASE? And I'll talk about why it's important in a moment as well. So CASE is the Connected Autonomous Shared Electric Vehicle. Connected meaning, much like with the Internet of Things, all the cars speak to each other, speaks to the road infrastructure. Apparently I'm not allowed to say infrastructure. Speaks to the road, speaks to your phone, speaks to your homes, so that everything is able to communicate, so that your vehicle knows what the vehicle in front of it's doing, what the person next to you is doing, what the cyclist, what the kangaroo is doing. Autonomous, obviously being the driverless part, the car drives itself, that part's obvious. Shared, again, things like GoGet, Uber, car next door, vehicles that you either own yourself and you let other people use, or vehicles that some central body owns and lets you use for a fee. And finally, electric, and we'll be spending a lot of our time on this, but cars that are powered by electricity rather than by refined oil, petrol or diesel. Now, I wanted to bring this up first of all because it's important to note that the CACE, the Connected Autonomous Shared Electric Vehicle, with the exception of shared because that's a service, not a technology, is actually not 4 separate vehicles. You wouldn't, you'd think that this much would be obvious, but it's something that we do come up with, that you're not going to get a connected autonomous vehicle that runs on petrol. The being able to solve all 4 rather, is quite important for us. And importantly, this acronym is actually backwards because what we have today is the shared and electric technology available. We do have exponential growth in this area, and we can see the connected autonomous off in the horizon. There are, for those of you who are a bit closer to the industry, you would know that autonomous is actually 5 different things, and we do have different levels of them. But for this case and for a broader audience, I'm just going to stick autonomous to that Hollywood level 5, completely driverless, no steering wheel car. Now, why is it important for us to solve shared and electric today, particularly electric? Because you consider, as I'll demonstrate in a moment, that there are a number of markets, quite large markets like China, France, UK, India, Germany, Norway, Netherlands, who have said that by either in the next 10 or the next 20 years, we're not going to let you sell any more petrol or diesel vehicles in our markets. Now, often the first response that comes back is that if someone says in 2040, this is what our market is going to look like, that's quite far away, so what does that really matter? Let's just get on with our lives for now. Let's see how things pan out. But from my perspective, somebody who represents the industry, the people who actually design and build these cars, try to sell them to you, that looks quite different. Because when we look at the year 2040, you have to consider that designing the architecture of a new car generally takes about 7 to 9 or 8 years. Let's just call it 8 years, just to be safe. So that takes 8 years just to see what is going to be the general shape of this car. We might tweak it every year to, update it a little bit, put a few new gadgets in it, but generally that's what it's going to look like. And then once you've gone through that and you've finalized that design, you want that car to sit on your production lines for another 8 years. So you want to get the value out of all the money you've invested in designing a cool new car, all the plant and the machinery that you build to actually build the thing and get it out to people as well. You want another 8 years. So that's 16 years already. And then we consider that when you build a car and you sell it to someone new, it has a general lifespan of about 12 years before it goes bust and someone sends it on the scrap heap. So there we're just seeing decades of time stack up, and throughout those 12 years, obviously your customer expects you to help them maintain the car, provide new parts for it, service the vehicle as well. So we start to see that when the major automotive markets around the rest of the world, just remember a country like China alone is already 1/3 of the new vehicle market. When they say, come 2040, you cannot sell a petrol car in our country, it means that right now, well actually last year, you have to stop investing in petrol technology. You start putting all of your money in electric. And so the technology that is to come, with connected, increasingly autonomous vehicles being 10, 15, 20 years away based on whose estimates you'll believe, as you start to look at that technology, you start to wonder, am I going to put this inside of the stuff that I can't sell by the time it becomes a reality? And the obvious answer there is no. It's a very important question, particularly being out of university. Because what we are seeing, what Australia is very good at, is designing new technologies. It's coming up with, sorry, I've put a little bit of a stitch there. Designing new technologies, coming up with things like CSRO, building Wi-Fi. What we're quite poor at is commercializing them. Unfortunately, most of the time our bright new engineers, the sort of graduates of the future, end up having to go overseas to commercialize their products. And what that looks like as a reality today is you start building the cameras, the LiDAR, the AI tech that goes into the vehicle. You get a little bit of grant funding. You go to a university and say, I've got the software part of it down. I now need to integrate it into a vehicle. They speak to their procurement people and they say, well, what we can afford is probably get you who's not a member of mine, Toyota Camry. Cheap car, runs easy. Put all your new tech into that. And then you reach out to someone who is a member of mine, someone like BMW, and say, great, look, I've come up with this great breakthrough. This car can completely drive itself. All the software's there. I've integrated it into a petrol car for you. Come and buy it off of me. And they just stare at you blank. So this isn't what what is the point of being integrated in this old technology for us? We need to redo all of this work. It's fine. It's great that you've done some of the work already, but why don't we take you back to our home country, develop the technology there and commercialize it? So again, the jobs don't end up with us. Now, what was our next? Yeah, okay, tech. Now there's also the question about the sense of urgency of at least catching up with where global directions are going in technology. Because as I mentioned, it's not enough just to look at what technology is possible, but what's available for us. And what we're starting to see today is government stepping in to say, well, we know this is the direction that the drivetrains are going in. We're going away from fuel and towards electric. And we know that there's going to be a massive amount of possibilities in both that technology on its own, but connected, autonomous vehicles as well, shared services too. So why don't we start laying the groundwork to be what we like to call EV ready? Make sure that in our markets you can drive a car from A to B, recharge it, people can conveniently use it to get where they're going. And why you want to step in to do that today, while there is still a cost premium attached to the technology, while we are working out a few of the kinks, making it go a little bit longer, making it a little bit cheaper, it's because we recognize that increasingly we don't have a lot of time when it comes to the uptake of technologies. What we've seen in the past is the idea that technology grows or is adopted, there's no laser pointer on that, that's okay. You can see on one end of it, is adopted incrementally. So little by little, more and more people take up the new tech. But as time goes on, when people see that there is an environmental, an economic, a societal benefit to some new product that's available to them, what we generally see, and what's a little bit harder to see in the graph, is that 0 to 2, 0 to 5% of uptake is quite difficult because there's a level of infrastructure that's required in there. There I am using infrastructure again. Why can't we use infrastructure? I missed that portion of it. There's a level of groundwork that's needed. A lot of it's regulatory, a lot of it's policy, some of it's providing certainty for market investment. But getting from 5 to 95% is actually very simple because you have all the foundations in place. So you do get a tipping point where it skyrockets up, and that's where you want to be. You want to be ready for when that skyrocket moment comes. And you can't just assume that if somebody else, somewhere else, especially when you're in a country like Australia that is separated by quite a lot of water, by quite a lot of distance from other markets, that you can let other people do that work for you. You actually have to play an active role. So this is what we're starting to see internationally. Exponential growth. This is annual sales, not year-on-year sales. Exponential growth in the electric vehicle market. Every year growing by roughly around 60%. So today we have about over 3 million electric vehicles on the roads globally. And in Australia we have somewhere about 5,000. Now, if you're wondering what the size of our market compared to others looks like, let's take a look at that in market share terms. We see that there's a global average of around 1.7%, a few stand away leaders, countries like Norway and Netherlands who acted much earlier. I should say it's the 2016 numbers. In 2017, everyone else's numbers went up but ours. And again, Australia really still sitting stagnant. Just to break up the monotony a bit, there's a Tesla Model S. It's a beautiful car, available for purchase today. Highly recommended. No, but so what is it that we are seeing happen in other markets? We are seeing countries recognize that from today up to a certain point, they are going to have to make some level of special intervention themselves. They can't just let the free market take over and decide. There are a range of benefits that they want. We'll get into what the benefits are. There are a range of benefits that they want for themselves. So what is it that they can do to spur that investment? I actually didn't check when I started, so can someone wave when my time's almost up or something? Sorry. I have a 100% strike rate of speaking for too long. I really enjoy what I do. And so for them, providing that early investment, I should stop putting this down, providing that early investment has completely reshaped their markets. So where electric vehicles have about 5,000 cars in Australia, there are about 500 available charging points. We really can't imagine, we're still asking the questions of, will this be the technology of the future? Is this a bet that we should be making for ourselves? When are they going to come? They're not asking those questions. What we're seeing globally is, again, the largest automotive markets in the world saying we are picking dates where we are going all in on electric. 100% of the cars that you have to sell. Some of these countries are saying this target sits at 2025, some in 2030, some in 2040. China hasn't set a date for theirs, but they're saying around 2040 as well. You will not be able to sell any car that runs on fossil fuels, essentially, that runs on petrol or diesel in our markets. So imagine, if you will, someone came to you and said, hey, in 2 decades' time, everyone's going to be using this thing called an iPhone. You should start working on apps for it. You should start working on components for it. You should start working on developing batteries for it. Of course, you don't get 2 decades' time with a technological disruption. It comes all at once, someone invents it, it's all out on the streets. Whereas here, the world is telling us, you have 2 decades' notice. This is the path that we are going down. What is it that you're going to do about it? So far, it's been nothing. And I like to point out this little red circle there around New Zealand because much like the rugby, the Prime Minister sweepstakes, the cricket, every other sport in the world, New Zealand's beating us on this issue as well. They actually do have targets in place. They have provided support in place. And just this morning, along with the Takatare airbag scandal, we also saw a German court pass that cities inside of the EU can ban people driving diesel vehicles as well. So they'll essentially mean a pretty large flow-on impact right across the EU for non-electric vehicles. What's next? So why are these countries, taking action right now to prepare themselves? What is it that they're waiting for in that tip-off point? Why do they see that there is an S-curve moment coming for them? It's got a lot to do with the broader clean energy industry and what we're seeing with lithium-ion batteries. So electric vehicles obviously run on electricity. That electricity is stored inside of a lithium-ion battery, usually underneath the car rather than in front of the car. that stores the energy, drives the car. So what we're seeing in the price reductions here, and so where are we today, 2017? I always do like to point out that what we actually see in historic price reductions is very dramatic declines. So the technology is both becoming more efficient and much cheaper at the same time. And then, of course, because this is Bloomberg's projections, people who do the projections are very conservative. They then say, okay, now we're only going to see incremental reductions. That's never actually true. We continue to see dramatic reductions. But even with that conservative estimate, what we see is that in 2021, the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle will become cheaper than an internal combustion engine. Total cost of ownership meaning everything that you pay in petrol and maintenance of the vehicle, which is much lower. And then by 2025, the cost of manufacturing an electric vehicle becomes lower than manufacturing an internal combustion engine. I say manufacturing because that disregards the fact that a company may choose to make their electric vehicle cheaper sooner for marketing reasons. Just the cost of producing the vehicle in the first place becomes cheaper. So by that point, it becomes the obvious solution. By that point, somebody walks into a car yard, sees two cars side by side, and this one is the cheaper one. You don't have to convince them to buy the vehicle anymore. You don't have to do anything special. They're going to want to buy it. The question for Australia becomes, will they have that option available to them? Because what we know in our market, and it's not the next slide, so I'll just say it anyway. What we know in our market is that, no, sorry, I thought I had a slide about this. What we know in our market is that of the top 10 selling vehicles, electric vehicles globally, 7 of them are priced under $50,000, 3 of them are priced over $60,000, 2 of those over $100,000. We have 3 of those vehicles available in Australia. You want to guess? They're all the ones priced above $60,000. So what those other countries are doing that we are not is addressing market uncertainty. They're saying, hey, look, there's a new technology that we're creating as manufacturers today. It has a cost premium attached to it because it is a new technology and we're working that tech out. So a customer goes into a car yard today, looks at 2 comparable cars side by side, and the one that's a battery electric one costs about $10,000 more. For us to bring a car to your market that costs $25,000, $30,000, we need to be able to sell, let's say, 2,000, 3,000 of those in order to make our returns, or an acceptable level of loss as they're making right now. Now, your country is selling about 1,300 or 1,500 every year, so we don't have any comfort that you have your act together. There's no infrastructure for these people to actually drive the vehicle, so we're going to continue not bringing products in. What does this thing do? Oh yeah, another one of the reasons why they're acting, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. Another reasons why they're acting is, of course, every country, including Australia, is investing quite a lot in their economies to reduce carbon from the electricity sector. So the next logical step, and I have a background in the electricity sector, that's how I'm from the E side, not the V side of electric vehicles. Once you make your electricity green, naturally you want to run things off of that electricity. So in Australia, while we're investing in decarbonising our electricity sector, in fact, the increases from carbon from petrol and other gases is negating those benefits. We're essentially throwing money away because our carbon emissions continue to rise while we're spending a lot of money in trying to decrease them. And so here we look at vehicle efficiency. This is the first question that we get is, Australia is a small market, we're far away, why should we do anything about it? Why not let other people do the heavy lifting? Always like this question because it sort of poses things that we can't change, like the fact that we're far away from the rest of the world, as if it's some great insight. As if, if you can't change it, put it aside and wonder what you can do, right? But okay, so we'll let the rest of the world do the heavy lifting for us, and then naturally the products will come to us, right? That's how things should naturally work. When we look at internal combustion engines and the way that technology has been trending, and why we use vehicle efficiency is what happens globally is that countries say that in order to sell a car in our market, you have to meet a certain efficiency standard. What that means for the manufacturer is when you build the car, you then have to spend more money to provide more technology in it to make it more efficient so that it uses less petrol to move forward, it causes less carbon emissions. So we see in the markets, the red one is the US and the green one's the EU, and the markets that have those standards in place, manufacturers go ahead and add that extra technology into their cars, make the cars more efficient, provide them out. In countries that don't, which is in the developed world, only Australia, we see that our cars remain inefficient. So we have the same companies selling, and these are my members, same companies selling their cars both in Europe, in the US, and in Australia, and the ones that they sell here are less efficient than the ones that they sell overseas. Speaks very rationally to, yes, there is a free market, but governments do have a role to play to steer that market in the correct direction. Mercedes Maybach, Again, nothing to say about this, just a pretty car. So what's going on in Australia? What's stopping us? And the next slide is the one I was looking for earlier. So there are three things that we look at. The vehicles that we have here are very high priced because we have that low volume. The cars that are coming in the prestige sector where you require lower sales in order to make your returns. All the cars that I've had up on our slides, for instance, all very high priced cars. No one here can afford. And also we have low availability of different variety models of cars. We also have recharging concerns where we hear quite often we're a large country. We don't drive very long distances, but we feel like we do because we're a large country. It's an important consumer perception for us to get over. Not a lot of charging points available and low consumer awareness. So again, it's easy to mistake this as being what the obstacles towards electrification and towards future mobility are, but important to remember inside of that. I haven't been looking up. No one's been giving me a wave, have they? No, okay. I'm doing okay, lovely. Important to remember inside of that these aren't issues that exist in the global market. These are issues that are increasingly becoming unique to Australia and in fact in OECD or developed nations are entirely unique to Australia. There's the one I was telling you about before. So you can see here the purple area being cars priced under $60,000. Our total sales remaining pretty stagnant, and then in 2016 when one of those models sold out and wasn't available, total sales dropped. We spoke about it, so I might move on. But it's not all doom and gloom for us. Because the direction that we're moving in is that although there has been very little support in place by government and regulation to date, we actually have a really healthy consumer base in Australia. We're higher educated, higher income earning, technology adaptive. People like bringing new technologies to our country because they're usually received very well. So what we see we have available today are vehicles that are either lower range or higher range and much higher priced. But the ones coming in, I'll just break this down quickly, the ones coming in are essentially higher range vehicles at a lower price point. Again, following where the technology is going, but this is essentially industry starting to make a bet on our customer base as opposed to having the same levels of support that they're seeing from other markets. What is this one? Aston Martin DBX. So here I'm going to talk about infrastructure naturally. That's what you talk about when there's an Aston Martin up on the screen. So where are those opportunities for Australia? The two things, obviously, we can once again have a vehicle manufacturing industry in Australia, not necessarily in Western Sydney, but we are seeing investment come in that area. But the things that we absolutely have to have here, because it can't be done internationally, is our own infrastructure. So providing charging in every home, in every workplace, in every car park, fast charging right across regional areas so that if you choose to, for some stupid reason, drive to Melbourne as opposed to fly, you can do so. Providing that charging is something that is today being done by Australian companies, and increasingly as the technology gets better and as we start moving away from privately owned and personally driven vehicles towards autonomous vehicles, there is a necessary step change in what charging technology looks like. Today, that technology looks like plugs. So much like with the Bowser, you plug the car in, or much like with your hairdryer, you're plugging it in. But in the future, as cars don't require human input, having to park it somewhere and plug it in naturally doesn't make sense. So being able to do that wirelessly, and do that wirelessly while the car is driving itself, is an area that we're seeing quite a lot of Australian investment in, quite a lot of the areas that Australian universities and the academic sector is, I keep doing this, and the academic sector is stepping up. And this is what it looks like. So putting solar panels over, one being for buses, over your roofs, over a carport, they're allowing a car to charge at it. We see a number of different business models that are available for people to look at and to exploit inside of Australia as well, whether that is recognising that it's such a low cost to recharge a vehicle in the future. Remembering there are two things that we're doing inside of this journey to future mobility. The first is electrification, which dramatically reduces the price of operating the vehicle, of refueling the vehicle. The difference being essentially being able to fully recharge a vehicle for about $3. Dramatically reducing the need for maintenance as we move from 127 moving parts to about 24 moving parts. And then as we go along that journey towards connected and autonomous vehicle, also reducing the labour costs of somebody needing to actually be behind the steering wheel and driving you around as well. So this is where we start to look at what does transport as a service continue to look like into the future? What does private vehicle ownership begin to look like? Is private vehicle ownership really even a reality moving into the future? We already know that with younger generations, that personal attachment to a vehicle, the vehicle as an extension of, I like to drive Holdens because they somehow reflect the way I look, the way I dress, the way I feel about myself, is starting to evaporate. Cars are becoming more genericized. There are means of transport, of mobility. And also we're seeing, as housing prices rise, other costs of living rises, that second most expensive asset that people are buying in a vehicle today is becoming less of a priority. So people are not owning vehicles. They're getting their licenses later. They're buying a vehicle much later on in life, maybe when they've started a family, as opposed to the first moment they get their Ps. Unless apparently they're UWS students and they don't have an option and they have to drive to campus. So heard in the transport sector earlier, in the transport stream earlier. But so we want to start to look at what are the opportunities for us. What are the weird little quirks about this change that we can start to exploit, that we can create some type of business out of here in Australia, here in Western Sydney? So there are some interesting quirks that we see. The biggest one being, like always, it's not just about designing the best technology, but it's about, it's about addressing what consumers feel that they want. So when we do the research, we see that people who drive electric vehicles charge at home and in the workplace about 95% of the time, and publicly 5% of the time. Then when we ask them what they want to see before they'll buy a car, they'll tell us that 95% of them will tell us we want to see a lot of public charging being made available to us. So they don't actually use the stuff, but they feel like they need to have it present. So what is the business model that allows you to create that infrastructure, but give people that sense of comfort? It's certainly valuable to somebody for that to exist, but recognizing that it'll be very, very low utilized, and also that the charge of the vehicle, I'm being told to wind up, so I'm just going to rush through some of this stuff. The charge of the vehicle itself has very low funds attached to it. I might skip over that one. Then finally also consider the future of the cabin itself. A lot of the thinking today reflects how we use cars being an interruption in our daily cycle of you step into a car to get you somewhere that stops you from what you're doing. Maybe when it's not driverless, you take your iPhone, your iPad with you and you entertain yourself for a little while. But looking at an empty cabin and remembering that people are spending 30, 60 minutes inside of it. And the question I want to leave you guys with, particularly the students with, is how are you going to monetize that? There is a captive audience in a blank area for a certain amount of time. What do we want to do with them in that time? Last slide, Jaguar E-Type electric. Thank you very much.